Try to mute Twitter so I don't have that. I should just close it actually. I will close it after I tweet.
All right. Well, welcome to Podcast Tips. I'm Rob Greenlee, and we're back live again on Thursday in episode 16. Thank you so much for joining me. If you're tuning into this, I know the audience is just coming in right now. So I just really appreciate you being here, and I have a terrific guest with me here that's going to share some of his many years of insights into podcasting. But I did wanted to share one little piece of information before I pull Ray in here, is that I'm in the process of rolling out a full audio and video podcast version of this show. So it'll be available in video form in like Apple Podcasts, as well as audio in all of the podcast listening apps. So I'm truly doing a convergence strategy, which I promised for a long time, but I've been going through and uploading all the episodes to the RSS feeds. So I think we're just about ready to kick it off. But tonight, let's jump in here, and I'm thrilled to have pro podcast producer Ray Ortega with me. I've known Ray for many, many years. He is on Twitter X under the @podcasthelper. So it couldn't be a better fit for this show because we are podcast tips. So Ray has been doing this for many years, and he does a lot with YouTube as well. So you can just imagine that the synergy here couldn't be any better. So Ray, thanks for joining me on the show. It's great to have you here. It's been a while since we've talked. So this is kind of a reintroduction to us too. It's been a couple of years. I've been a guest on your Podcasters Roundtable podcast for many years, but you're not really doing that show much anymore, right?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I think the last time we probably talked, you were probably on my show. So, but
Right.
It has been a while. That show, we'll say it's on hiatus. So as podcasters, we never say it's over. We always say, we'll get back to it. So hopefully the roundtable will start up again at some point. But yeah, a little bit of a hiatus there. I think there's probably almost like 200 episodes of stuff to go through, rounds as we call them. But
right.
Yeah, I a little more focus on YouTube these days, which is, you'll find out that if you start podcast and YouTube and all these things, and we'll talk about it, that at some point something often gives, right? So you have to find that balance. So maybe we'll talk about that. But what you mentioned about what you're doing, about your videos and your RSS feed, is very interesting. So I want to dig into that too.
Yeah, no, it was the premise of going into this with StreamYard that we were going to do this kind of audio and video podcasting. I was just a little slow to get the RSS feeds all configured and all the episodes uploaded. I got behind. So, even little old me can kind of be slow on the uptick on this, because it does take a lot of extra time and effort to get initially set up, and maybe we can talk a little bit about that too. But then when you add the layer of video files, that creates a whole nother bucket of worms to deal with as far as file sizes and processing time, and having tools to actually edit the videos if you choose to do that. So there's lots of things that kind of go into this process, and I hope to kind of dig into that with Ray, because he's kind of living in that world. But before we jump too much into this, I did want to share a little bit more about Ray and what his sites are online. Like, he's got a YouTube channel as well, and I wanted to share that really quick here too. And he's got a lot of how-to videos about podcasting equipment and microphones and cameras and things like that, which can be very, very helpful if you're in the market for trying to add elements to your podcast. So Ray, tell us a little bit about your YouTube channel and what your goals are there.
Yeah, I mean, YouTube for me, maybe 2009, I started a channel, and it was only based on the fact that someone in the comments, probably social, had asked me. I had posted a picture of an interview setup that I had filmed. And they asked me, hey, something about the audio, right? So I think my first real video, one of the first few, and that did really well, it was literally me saying to the camera, hey, Mike, here's how you do this. So I was putting a video on there to answer a question. Turned out a lot of people had that same question. So People want to
Right.
know more about the gear. So I just started posting videos, kind of along the same lines. And for me, I've had podcasts about podcasting, and that's what the roundtable is about. And the YouTube channel is an extension of that. It's if I learn something, whether it's through work or tips, whatever, I feel like you should share it, or it's kind of lost. It's kind of wasted on one person, right? So I love to share tips, and the best comments I get on the channel come from people who are just like, thank goodness, I'm so glad I found this. It was really helpful. And that's 100% what I'm doing it for. I will say now over the years, I got, I don't know, it's something like, what does it say there? 76,000 subs, right? Really cool. Hey, hit the subscribe button. I'm a YouTuber. I have to say that. I'm trying to get that play button, but that's only like that's like just a target you set for fun. But I noticed that, the channel has done really well over those 11, 12, 14 years, whatever it is. And then, so at some point you can monetize your channel when you reach enough watch time and all of those little things that you need to do. And so some of it makes some money. I call it, it's kind of like golf and beer money. It's for fun. I'm not trying to make a living with it. I am fortunate that I make my living full-time in podcast production. And so I don't have to grind a YouTube channel. But, once it got to about 50,000, if I wanted to go to a situation where it was making money, like real, what you would consider like livable money, I started to be able to see that's where that started to happen, right? More brands reach out. You have affiliates. There's different things you can do in terms of what you've been teaching. You can take people from your channel, give them courses, all that stuff. So the only goal for my YouTube channel is just to keep sharing what I learn.
Yeah.
And that's the real fun for it. If I would like to get one of those play buttons, back there just as a trophy, but just to share is really the main goal of the channel.
Yeah, and I wanted to share too that at the end of the show, we're going to do a StreamYard giveaway for some merch, a Puddles duck, which you can see on the screen here, as well as a hoodie sweatshirt from StreamYard. And StreamYard has this giveaway tool that if you haven't seen it in full effect, you can use it in your show too. It's just at streamyard.com/giveaway. And you can do that with your own StreamYard program as well. So if you have something that you want to give away during your show and use as an enticement for your audience to stick around on a live show, that's also a good use for it as well. And a lot of the StreamYard shows utilize this tool for that alone. Like Puddles the Duck here is a popular giveaway item, as well as their t-shirts and their sweatshirts and all this stuff, which is a fun thing.
I did not know the duck had a name. So I use StreamYard. In fact, I have a rich history with the Roundtable and StreamYard, Google Hangouts, the whole thing. So I'd love to talk a little bit about that, but I didn't realize that the duck had a name. I do make fun of the duck. It's kind of a fun thing when we do our live stream, because I use the free version. I use the premium version at work, and I use the free version for my hobby stuff. And it's always like, who gets the duck, right? So someone will have a duck. And I do joke that he's wearing, or they are wearing Skype headphones. So, but I would love now that you can get them, I think I'm gonna have to go buy a Puddles for sure.
They're StreamYard headphones, not Skype headphones. But
I
they
know
do
what
kind
they
of look
are,
like
but
it, don't they? Right.
Yes, it's the color and I'm just saying. But, it's funny, Rob, that I don't think a lot of people might even realize that Skype was such a tool that we use, the tools we have these days, like StreamYard.
Right Skype, there, you can see it on the screen right there.
That's right.
That's what he's talking about. Right.
I mean, Skype really dropped the ball, to be honest with you. And now you've got better services like StreamYard, which like I said, I use it every day. So I could be a shill for StreamYard for sure.
Yeah, it's such a fun platform. I mean, there's so much creativity you can bring to it, and then that's why it was just a perfect match for me wanting to do live again. And I know that you love that as well, I'm sure. But why don't you tell us a little bit about some of if you can talk about it, some of the projects that you've been working on over the last few years around podcasts and this kind of convergence, or have you been doing a lot with video dedicated to YouTube, or has there been crossover with podcasting with your video work?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've put my toe into all the different things, right? So I don't really, I started as a video podcaster. So when we talk about podcasts, video is where I started. And that was really for me to learn how to do podcasting, because that's back in like 2006, right? Everything's new back then. And so I actually shifted to audio later on. And then at work, I work on a network of shows where we produce both video as well as podcast, as well as videos that are podcasts. So I would love to even talk about sort of the elephant in the room. We say the word video podcasting, which is what it sounds like you're going to upgrade your show too, but video podcasting is a thing. It exists, but it doesn't really exist. And so I think there's this stark difference. Now we're being nerdy and we're talking about the technicalities of it all, but I think it does matter. So you have video podcasting,
Right.
you have videos, and you have podcasts that are on video, which is what YouTube is. And I know YouTube has started to embrace podcasting. They're doing a little with RSS. It's still not a podcast.
No, it's not.
Right. So, but
technically
people don't
it's
know
not,
that.
but increasingly, as I'm sure you've seen, the research is showing that audiences don't really care anymore.
Right.
They're like, if it looks like a podcast, sounds like a podcast, it must be a podcast.
Right.
It doesn't
So-
matter what form it's being delivered in, is from a distribution standpoint.
Yeah. And for me, it doesn't matter to the audience, right? We've always talked about that. Podcast it's a word that has some technical stuff behind it, but
It
it
does,
only
yeah.
matters, we often use the word show instead of podcast, because it really is that. But there is a difference when you are a producer, and understanding the difference, I think, is important, because if you're a podcast that's on YouTube, it does not work the same, right? So
Right.
like if your podcast if it's not really a podcast, which basically means it has an RSS feed, your relationship with your subscribers is even different, right? So on YouTube, which is, I think there was the recent study that said when most people think about podcasts or where they go and get podcasts, they answered YouTube, but
Right.
you're not actually getting a podcast. So when you're on YouTube, and I talk about this all the time with my own YouTube channel versus my podcast. So the Roundtable has something like 2,000, 3,000 audio podcast subscribers. It also exists on YouTube as video.
Yeah.
You can count on about the number of your subscribers. You can kind of count on that for your listens weekly, right? So whether you're telling an advertiser or whether you're just telling a guest how many people you get listening. Whereas on YouTube, you kind of don't know, right? You put out a video, it does not mean that the person watching is going to get the next episode. And I know YouTube's working that a little bit. It's still algorithm based, which a podcast is not, right? So there is a relationship with the audience that I think a producer needs to understand. Audience, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they can think what it is, and there's a decent chance that it's going to be available off of an RSS feed. It may not be available off of a video RSS feed. That's it. It more likely, if it's available as a podcast, it's going to be available as an audio podcast
Rob,
version.
let's
Yeah.
I went into Apple Podcasts today. Good luck finding video podcasts. They exist. And the funny part about that is the history. Podcasts come before YouTube, right? And so I remember back in the day, we can go real OG old school, but things like Tiki Bar TV, Dig Nation, these were all video podcasts. And even my show was a video podcast. You found those on a podcast platform, right? So Apple Podcast.
Yeah,
And
even a Revision 3. We
Revision
had
3, the whole network. Yeah.
Jim Latterbach was on this program about a month and a half ago, and he was the CEO of Revision 3. And there was an era when there were whole media companies formed with venture capital and everything that were just doing video podcasts to RSS feeds.
Yes,
So
absolutely. And so video podcasts, as far as video goes, video podcasts had a lead on YouTube. So they had a head start. And that is kind of where you consumed your video, right? And so with video shows that were made by basically independent creators, you're talking about Revision 3, they were kind of like a startup, Cranky Geeks and all that stuff. Because you got the whole This Week in Technology Network, huge, right? Huge. And then that starts to shift over to YouTube. You don't really see podcasts go there early on. Video starts to really emerge. But putting your video in a podcast feed, and this is what I'm curious from you, and you can help us out. If someone is considering considering doing that. One of the reasons, and so again, I checked out Apple today, and you can forget about discovery of video podcast. It's not in there. They don't show you. I can't find where to find video podcasts. It's kind of a joke, because I knew a few that are, and I went to their audio version, and it's not there. And I noticed a lot of I looked at a couple big shows that I know are big video podcasts that are on YouTube, and they're not there.
Yes.
I was checking my.
Yeah, are you
checking my
worried at
bandwidth,
all,
but
Ray, that Apple will just get rid of that, or do you think it's just being de-emphasized because they're not seeing a lot of activity on that
I
right
don't
now?
think that I'm concerned too much because I just don't think that any modern producer is doing it, right? So I
Right.
just feel like things have kind of, for this point in time, things have kind of settled to where, if you think podcast, you go to a podcast app platform in terms of producers who deliver to platforms, right? Your audio only, Apple's kind of always been the main player in that game. You can look at the stats. Todd gives those stats sometimes. You guys on the New Media Show talk about that. And video has won out for YouTube, right? And that's why we're seeing podcast on YouTube. That's why we see YouTube start to embrace the word podcast, not completely the
Right.
tech. And so I'm not too concerned because, again, I don't see producers going there. If you have a show that you want to put in the RSS feed and deliver that way, that's great for your audience who consumes it that way. And you can pick up some extra subscribers or extra views, whatever. But it's not, I don't think it's concerning to me because it's really not, Spotify does it too, but it doesn't exist. So it's too expensive. And so that was kind of what I was thinking, is that like to do that, you have to host the video, right? So
Right.
I don't think a lot of people understand that, like, what does YouTube give you? People complain about YouTube all the time. It's free. They give
It's
you
free.
free
It's free bandwidth to
high
deliver the
bandwidth, right?
content. Right.
Right. So
Right.
go ahead and try to be a video podcast producer and deliver it to an RSS feed. Where are you going to host it? That's going to cost a lot of money.
Well, there's really only 3 places you can do it right now, and that's through the earliest podcast hosting platforms that ever existed, because they existed back when video podcasting was more of a thing, right? And that's Libsyn, Blueberry, and Podbean. So those are the 3 that still support it. You can do a video podcast today, but it'll cost you between $50 and $100 a month to actually do a video podcast, because you got to pay for the bandwidth. I mean, a
Yep.
typical like for this show, like I just spent the last couple days uploading a bunch of over 1 hour video files that are in 1080p, right? And those are like anywhere from 2.5 to 3 gigabytes in size. And you just think about how much bandwidth it takes to deliver a full episode of that. It does take some bandwidth. But a lot of what happened early on with video podcasting is that YouTube launched, right? And like you say, people didn't want to have to pay for the bandwidth, so they gave all their videos over to YouTube. And so that's why we saw the drop off and the de-emphasizing of video podcasts was because of YouTube. And it's really ironic that YouTube has finally woken up and says, we're going to fully embrace. I mean, I used to work for Podcast One down in Los Angeles, and we used to work with YouTube a lot because we had a lot of big celebrities and stuff. And YouTube has always had a YouTube team, even going back to 2013, 2014. It's just that they never even thought of the idea that they would create a playlist called podcast, because that's really what they've done here. Now, granted, they did launch YouTube Music, which is primarily a music consumption platform, but most of the content, even in YouTube Music, is primarily video. But there's still audio in there, and they are ingesting audio RSS feeds. And those are primarily going to be utilized in the YouTube Music platform, because they do want to push towards that. But it is kind of a unique opportunity, Ray, and talk to this too about this opportunity that YouTube has to marry audio and video together in the discovery process. And not many of the platforms besides Apple has really done that on the podcasting side. And do you think there's any way that we can keep video podcasting alive, or do you think ultimately Apple's going to wind up dropping it because it's not moving the needle for them.
Well, I think that, I think the one big question that what people have always had, at least from, the podcast production side, is would YouTube start to like give you the ability to basically put your videos in an RSS feed, right? So essentially,
and deliver it to YouTube, right?
Free hosting. Well, I mean, free hosting for your.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, so upload it to YouTube, and YouTube would create an RSS feed that then.
Well, a lot of people
utilized.
don't. A lot of people think, oh, I can just host my video podcast on YouTube. They let me, you know what I'm saying? So I can just grab the video file and put it as the link in the RSS feed for the enclosure. You can't do that, right? YouTube doesn't actually give you public access to that file, so to speak. So, although I will say, I have a tip for you, Rob, and as you're processing those videos, and for anyone who is trying to then host their videos, there's a couple other sites where you can host a video file and deliver it to a podcast feed cheaper. We used to talk about that back in the day, and I don't remember the names of a couple. Reach out if you're interested. I'll find the resources. But when you put a video on YouTube, go to your creator studio, your backend, and download the MP4 that they actually deliver on YouTube. Right. I have never seen a compression algorithm deliver such high quality and such low file size. So if I was going to put in, I also probably wouldn't put in HD into maybe podcast, maybe 720, right? That's what I think YouTube's going to give you.
Yeah.
But the file size, you're talking about gigabytes, they get it down to like a 2 gigabyte could be like a 50 megabyte, 40 megabyte, ridiculous file size. And I don't see a lot of compromise on the quality. So if you're trying to do that, that is a tip that it's one way to use YouTube.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think trying to get the file size down, and I'm sure the technology exists now to crunch those videos down. They still look good.
One does it better than YouTube. So just grab
I mean, I think, most people are going to consume that probably on their mobile devices anyway. So that screen is pretty good quality screen, but it doesn't have to be, like 4K. And I do know that there's some effort, abound here to upgrade everything that StreamYard's doing to 4K too. And I think that there's been some hesitation on that because it's just, I don't know that it's necessary, but I guess as we move into this next phase, right, of being able to utilize and consume this content on large screen televisions, which is how I'm consuming YouTube increasingly, and not really consuming that much of it on my mobile phone. So you have this, and that's what's coming out in the research too, is it's coming out as people are kind of ambidextrous on their place and the form of the content, right? And they're saying in certain situations, I want to consume it on my mobile phone as an audio file. In other situations, I want to be able to consume it on my television in my living room. So it kind of gets back, and that's what the research is starting to show now, and that's what's caused this kind of confusion in the market, right? Because the industry of podcasting wants to think of this medium as a audio only medium, and it's been having that mentality for many years now. So
I think that's over. I really think it's over. I don't see any big show come out these days and not have a video component to it. And we can talk about more about how podcasters can do that. It sounds overwhelming, but even just as a marketing for your audio, I mean, it's just the big podcast I see is, I guess the other big thing to clear up is it's not required. Like, could you have a successful audio show that doesn't have a video component? Absolutely.
Of course.
Right? We can cite example after example, but people are they're going to think they have to, right? Because they do see bigger shows doing TikTok or Instagram or even, YouTube shorts or whatever. And that's just a component of marketing. But on that lean back experience you're talking about on TV, gosh, again, back to New Media Show, and Todd has tracked set-top boxes forever. And it's been this tiny percentage, almost non-registered percentage that shows people consuming at least podcasts on set-top boxes. But YouTube just announced maybe yesterday or 2 days ago that they're leaning in to the experience on the TV. The YouTube, I use an Apple TV, and people have Rokus and stuff like that.
Yeah, I have a Roku.
I've got a couple.
I've got like 3 of them. Right.
Great. They've never been great, but YouTube is now leaning in, and they've said they're going to do it. So you can expect, because why are they doing it? They're seeing it. Like you mentioned, they're seeing people consume on TV. And for me, when we talk about a discussion about being a podcast that exists in video or has a YouTube component to it, that's really, it's even less about like a conscious choice, and it's more about for the viewer or the listener where they are in time when they consume, right? So I
Right.
have very specific moments when the audio goes in to an ear, and that's how I want it to be, right? I'm working in the yard, whatever it is. And I might get into bed, and that's like, the next half hour is YouTube time. So
Yeah.
I looked at my podcast app today, and I think of the maybe 13 podcasts that I actually listen to. So it's a podcast app, it's audio only. There's only one there where I will flip flop depending on where I am. And if YouTube shows me there's a new episode, that's a big if, but if they show me that, I'm more apt to watch some of it. And so that's another
Yeah.
aspect to talk about, that consumption retention rates, which YouTube cares a lot about. Podcast generally kicks YouTube's butt on that one. More people will listen to more of a podcast episode, and it has to do with that decision that you're talking about, that conscious decision of this is the Monday at 3:00 is when I listen to this show. It comes out then,
Right.
and I consume the whole hour, right? So it's just so many elements to it that to me it's fascinating, and playing in both is in some ways the same, but is definitely very different as well.
Yeah, I would really hate to see the option of a true RSS-based video podcast go away. I would
Sure.
like to
It wouldn't
see
work for me.
that option remain and be embraced. There is quite a few apps now that still embrace video. It's not being actively featured. So in the early days of iTunes and Apple Podcasts, they would have a separate tab that you could click at the top of the user experience that would actually basically enable you to flip between audio and video podcasts. So that was a very convenient way of surfacing that kind of content. But I don't know which upgrade that they moved to that kind of removed that ability. So I'm not even sure that you can even do a search query, Ray, in there to, like, I think like you said earlier, that it's very difficult to find that. Now I do identify the on the cover art that this is a video podcast. So what do you
Yeah.
think about that?
I mean, I think that's helpful. I mean, it's clearly the platform has to help you out. I mean, you have two issues, right? You have
Right.
the platform supporting it, which support for that is going away. And I haven't even looked in Spotify, but we know the big example of shows that have gone over there exclusively that are video shows that were huge on YouTube that didn't exist on Spotify only. That has changed because they are seeing that like walling it
Yeah.
off like that's not a good idea, or doesn't work for the amount of money they're paying. But the platform has to support it. But beyond that, it's also it's back to that hosting thing. Things have to change for producers. The majority of people who produce podcasts are not going to make money to pay for that podcast. And so, if you can get past that hurdle of the extra work of putting a video, if you're going to have video, it's great to have another distribution point. So
Yeah.
podcast is a great way, but it's prohibitively expensive for a producer to do that. So the platforms have to support it. And it's kind of like a chicken and egg thing, right? Because if the producers aren't putting it there, the platforms aren't going to support it. An Apple Podcast
Yeah.
used to be a black background if it was
Yeah.
a video podcast, and I didn't even see that today. I typed in video podcast. That was my search. I got no video. I got audio shows. There was a show on Apple
Oh.
Podcasts called 5 Minute Video. It was an
Mhm.
audio podcast with no apparent video version. So
Yeah, I think the only way to discover it is that if you know that a particular show is a video
Even
podcast
that's
and
hard.
you type it in. So like the New Media Show, which is an
Yeah.
audio and video podcast, and soon this show will be as well. You will be able to type into the Apple Podcast search algorithm the name of the show, and it will pull up both versions of the show, right? It'll pull up the
Yeah,
video,
it
and
should.
I've identified
Not
the
doing it
artwork.
well. It wasn't
Right.
doing it
No,
well
they're
in
not.
my experience.
Well, it's not a featured area anymore, which is what it
Mhm.
used to be many years ago. It used to be its own little separate area, so you could throttle back and forth between video and audio podcasts. It's just not in there anymore. But Ray, I think we could talk about this topic for probably 2 hours because it has such a deep history in the medium. But I did want to jump in to talk a little bit in helping our audience a little bit to understand kind of your current thinking on production equipment and what people are using to do video nowadays with their podcast, and also, on the podcast side, what things are you finding as really important for new creators, as well as existing ones that want to maybe upgrade what they're doing? How to really think about the equipment market right now when it comes to podcasting?
Right. So, I mean, there's
a
I
lot.
love gear, and there's such a continuum of gear options, and people
Yeah.
get kind of stuck on the gear part. And so,
Yeah.
you know, I used to always say on my podcast, like, you got to press record. That's the most important part. And it
Right.
sounds like a setup, and then I was brought on as a shill, but StreamYard, I wasn't.
No, right. Not at all.
Hashtag not sponsored, but StreamYard, for me, is a place that I would start a lot of people on. So do you have a webcam and some good audio? That's enough. You want to put your best foot forward. You're going to put a lot of time into this. And so I think where quality really matters is people's first impression. And I've always talked about how the way podcast, people don't know who's behind the show, how much money's behind the show, who the talent is. My podcast could be sitting right next to Oprah's podcast, right? If it's good. And so one person might click on something that has $1 million budget, and then they click on someone next to them who has a show that's in the similar niche, but has no budget. And it will show up if you don't pay a little of attention to your production quality. So I think it's important to pay attention. It's also important to not get scared that, I don't have the money. It costs too much. So again, a webcam. And so, I've set up something here tonight. It's kind of ridiculous. I posted on my Instagram, which is also Podcast Helper, kind of the setup I had for tonight. But we'll see. We'll see if I crash and burn here. But I'm going to try to switch things. So right now you are watching me on a setup that is what I would say more top end. This is a mirrorless camera, Sony mirrorless, with a nice, nice lens on it, that large aperture, does all these things, right?
So is that this camera here?
That's the camera we're seeing now, right? So the background's a little out of focus. And so I'm going to switch here to my webcam, because I use webcam all the time for the roundtable, the show I did, the podcast that I did that's on video. And so if I switch here to my webcam, we'll see is different. You can see a difference. The contrast is obviously very different. Things get a little mushier, but if I showed up this way, because
it doesn't look bad. It doesn't look bad.
It looks great. I
think it
hope.
Looks great. Actually, it's sharp and it's got good color depth.
Right. So we went from a $4,000 option or something, whatever, by the time you buy lenses and gear, to like $100 option. And it's mostly because of lighting. So this is what I mean by like caring a little bit and putting a little effort into it, because you're going to spend so much time on this. You want it to look, you want all of it, your audio to be good and your video to look pretty good. So cameras need light. And so if you have a nice light, which again can be also cheap, you get a good quality, right? And so you can do it for 100, you can do it for 3,000, and it becomes sort of that law of diminishing returns. Like, how much different is it? I switch back to my nice camera, which it renders me, more detail on my face, more shallow depth of field. I can come up here to
it's a little
lens.
darker though, I've noticed.
So then you have.
You need more light for that higher end camera. Is that what you mean? Or
no, I can switch the settings. So it's just the settings.
Got it.
So the webcam actually was a little overexposed. So that's why this
it.
one looks darker. So your skin's kind of blown out. So understanding, and that's what I try to do on my channel, the basics of lighting, the basics of camera, the basics of audio, because I do this stuff, but I'm not, it's not like I do get paid to do it, but I didn't train classically in sort of that kind of production. So I try to take hard concepts and bring them down to make them a little easier, but 100% for the person who's just getting into it, right? So webcam is totally fine. You're hearing me through the SM7B, which is, again, expensive microphone, but
it's not really necessary. Right?
Not necessary at all. This is like $100 USB microphone, and we talk about it on my show all the time, and we have used USB microphones for years. So again, you've got that $100 versus that, 3x, 4x price. because this comes with a lot of things. And so you'll
Mhm.
see this all the time, especially with video. You see the SM7B. Half of the reason it's chosen is because the way it looks, I think.
Yeah.
And
That's what this
so,
one is too. I have a SM7B I'm using too. Yeah.
yeah. And
It's
so,
good.
like, all levels of production are available to anyone, right? And so the key is you probably have all of these things. If not, you can buy a USB mic. Again, $60 USB microphone those are available. Samsung does a couple, ATR does a couple.
Mhm.
You have a camera built into your computer, and if you light that well, it generally will look pretty good, right? And that's a great place to start. And then you can build up from there.
Well, and also a great camera too is on your iPhone or on your
And
mobile
yes,
phone
I
too.
actually did see the episode you did with Chris Perillo, and he
Yeah.
uses his phone. So this is an option as well.
Yep.
I find doing things via phone. This is an insane camera, by the way.
I know, it's really good.
And I
Pretty
via
amazing.
Wi-Fi connected this camera to my computer the other day, but I find this I don't like to operate that way personally. I like buttons and dials.
Yeah.
It needs to be a phone while I'm doing other things. And so, but you do have like practically a mirrorless camera in your pocket, right? So whether
Yeah.
it's Android or whatever type of phone you have, most of them can plug in and be used via probably some app that's going to let you use it as a camera. So there really is no excuse to not get started. And then,
Right.
my Twitter handle is Podcast Helper. So literally two things I always tell people: ask me before you buy gear, because you really need to know what you're trying to do, what your needs are, because most times people just buy what other people's stuff they see, and it's too much. They don't need that much. You don't need a 4-channel mixer when you're a 1-person podcast, right? Necessarily.
Right.
So ask me, and then if you're confused about something, again, ask me. And that's, generally what I'm trying to do is help people go from, where I started was I still have my original microphones here, $100 mic, very cheap.
Yeah, I have them all here too. I've got a bunch of
Mhm.
them behind me too. I think I mentioned I've got a shotgun up there on my shelf there, and I've got a MV7 behind me there. You can kind of see it right back there, and then a bunch of those ATRs like you had mentioned, and
Yep.
Q2Us, and
I'm
so
going to
I've gone
switch my
through a lot.
microphone actually.
Right.
So
So, yeah.
another
So you go.
element too, and
Yeah.
what I'm saying about like people, what your needs are. A lot of people, we're podcasters. So having a microphone in the shot is kind of natural. In fact, maybe important, just
It
because
is. Yeah.
it denotes podcasting. I will tell you that I've noticed some of the biggest YouTubers who have podcasts. I've noticed and I've heard them say, like Colin and Samir, if you follow them, they're about creator economy. They're about creators. And I think that if you look at their thumbnails, and if you're on YouTube, thumbnails are kind of everything. It's really important, right? And we
Mhm.
talked about show album artwork and having the word video on there. That's important because people know. I saw an advertiser at the bottom of podcast artwork today, and I now know just from the artwork that they are the advertiser of that show. I thought, and I've seen it before, it looks kind of cheap, but if they're paying you, it's something we could talk about. But it was interesting to me and it worked. But thumbnails are huge. It is the people's first reason they might click. And so like Colin Samir, they'll put the person, because they have a sit down, they have what we have, except it's in studio.
Right.
And they have people talking to other people. It's talking head, right? This is always kind of a thing we've talked about with podcast on video, like who wants to watch just talking head? It's less compelling, right? And that's part of the visuals. We try to make it more compelling. You're
Yeah.
switching the camera. We have like LED lights. You don't have to have colored LEDs to be a YouTuber, by the way, but you have things in your background. And so we're bringing in comments. So all of these elements
Yeah.
make talking head more interesting. But on their album artwork, you will see, and it's very deliberate, that there is a microphone in front of the person. And this is
Right.
to let people know, because it's a big deal when you click a thumbnail. If you don't get what you're expecting to get from the thumbnail, boom, people are gone. Retention drops. YouTube doesn't show your video, right? So they found that like, oh, hey, when we do these interviews, a microphone denotes the fact you can kind of expect that you're going to get a conversation, a podcast.
Right.
Right.
Right. And I think that's what people are seeing on YouTube when they think that a show on YouTube is a podcast, is that if that show is being done like we are with two microphones, it must be a podcast but there's also a lot of shows on YouTube that are wearing lavaliers, or they're doing shotgun mics, or they have mics that are just above their head or something like that you can't see in the shot. Right.
I just switched my microphone. It's actually, I don't know if it sounds different to you, but there's a
It
shotgun.
does a little bit. It
It
does.
should a little bit. All right. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of out of the shot. Let me see if I can.
Yeah, and that's what's dangerous about switching microphones in the middle of a
Okay.
program too, is that there will be slight changes because people get used to the sound that they hear and
Right.
they just accept it. But if they hear a difference, then it can be a little jarring. Right.
Yeah, I have a lav mic here too, because I plugged in all these different options just to show people that, like, to let you know the difference, right? So the shotgun is like in a situation where you don't want to see the microphone in the picture, right? You might not be doing a podcast and you don't want that to be like a main element in your shot. And then there's lav mic. So you're hearing me on the shotgun, essentially. So you can make that sounds great, right?
Right.
And it's all about like kind of the environment that you're in and the setup, but that's another option. Whereas, the microphone goes away and you're still hearing the same audio. Now there's no microphone. And so it's a different feeling. And if I put on a lav, which I won't turn it on, but unless the comments say turn it on, they want to hear it. There is a difference in quality. But I can move around anywhere I want. So if I'm standing up, if I'm doing like cooking show, if I'm an exercise YouTuber, podcaster, that might be important to you, right? But the SM7B is my daily driver. Getting it close is one of the benefits of a dynamic microphone.
Yeah.
And you can hear that probably changed right there when I switch back to this microphone. So there are different reasons to use different microphones. But again, don't get overwhelmed by that, because you could literally buy a $50, $60 USB microphone.
Yeah, it's not
The
fine.
main thing is proximity to your mouth, right? A cheap microphone can be made to sound really good if it's close to your mouth. The biggest problem people make is they will use their phone, and the phone is over here, and now it sounds like garbage. But it has to do with distance, but even more it has to do with your environment. So the place you are recording in makes a bigger impact on your audio quality than the mic almost ever will, honestly. So those are important elements.
Yeah, I like this question. How do you feel about interacting with viewers, like in this program? Do you think it ruins like maybe a discussion thread that's going on? And this is an ongoing kind of thing to think about with live, is that you can create a discussion that's very focused on topics and things like that. But I've found that, if you can thread into the conversation like we are right now, a topic that's raised by the audience, I think it's a compelling thing to do. But it can also, at the same time, it can be a little disruptive from the flow of conversation too. So there is a kind of a line to walk on this, that it can be sometimes challenging, because the audience sometimes is thinking about things differently than we are in our discussion. And so, that's the balance that, I try and strike with this show. Just to, if you want to do a live show, you're going to be likely faced with these challenges too, of how do you balance the topics and the flow of the conversation with a guest, at the same time taking in audience questions. Oftentimes the audience questions will ride right along with the conversation, but sometimes they come in at a different time in the flow. Like this show gets a lot of comments, it gets a lot of questions, and it's difficult for me to really address everything that's said. But I think it's an important thing for you to think about in your versatility of being a live producer, to understand your limitations as a host, as well as hopefully the audience will understand that what I'm looking for generally is questions that are contextual to the conversation, but realize that may not align at all times. Ray, do you have any opinions on this?
So many.
So many. I know we could do a whole show just on
a whole
this.
show on this.
Yeah.
The first thing I would say is I don't know that I recommend going live in the beginning. Like, it's funny because my first audio only podcast was a live show. Well, guess what? No one knows who I am. I didn't have a previous podcast. I had no audience, and I wanted questions from the audience. Guess what I didn't get? Any questions from the audience. So, you know,
Yeah.
it can be really challenging. And then it's just another element to think about. Like
Oh, it
you're
is.
switching cameras, you're looking at questions. And so this also is a kind of a classic question when you give a talk at a conference. Do I take questions during the conference, during the speech, or
Yeah.
after? And I love doing after, but that's something you've decided ahead of time. So there are a lot of shows, this one is sort of integrating the audience, which is if you can do that, it's fantastic. We've talked about that on podcasts all the time. People send in feedback, which is very hard to get, but when they send it in, integrating that even in post-production afterwards, stuff that has come in via email and social over the the weeks since you while you're producing your podcast, bring those in, include the audience. So you can do it. You doesn't even have to be live. But it really depends on the type of show you have. Like if you're a storytelling podcast, you probably don't do live. Doesn't mean you don't have a live component to your show where on Tuesdays at 7, we go and we chat with the audience, right? So this is something you decide when you're thinking about your format, or it's something you just try, right? So, nothing's going to happen if you try and it doesn't work out. So StreamYard's great because I produce a lot of shows at work where I'm the producer. So so it's nice if you can find this on your show. It can be someone in your audience. It can be a family member, a friend. If you can find someone to handle that juggling during the production and you don't have to, that's really nice. So I'm a producer. I sit behind the scenes and do all the camera switching, bring in the lower thirds, but we use the record feature, right? You don't have to go live on StreamYard. You can just record it. And then you post it, in our case, to YouTube later. We post it to the podcast feed later.
Yeah.
So many different ways. And so I love bringing in the audience if the show is that type of show, right? And so I think what you have to be careful of, and so this drives me crazy. So live stream, a lot of times, and this is the problem with Twitter Spaces, it's 5-10 minutes before they kick off the show. It's just dead air, or they're just waiting for people to come in. A live stream often is like, we're going to wait 5 minutes, let people filter in. And as a podcast producer, like, would you ever put a show like that in your podcast feed? You wouldn't. You'd chop that off. So, that can be the same thing with questions. If you let it distract you and completely derail the conversation, that might be an issue. It depends all on the topic of what you're doing and what your audience really likes. So having that conversation with your audience is important, whether you just ask for feedback. Do you like when live questions come in? In some cases, the show's going to be like, I just want the how-to. Just give me that, and then you can do live streams later. Or a lot of people, bring the questions in. And then as a host, you have to learn how to bring it in, ask it, not get derailed, unless that's what the podcast is. If the fun is getting derailed, cool, that's part of it too.
Yeah, because I think it was about a month ago, I did an episode that was just audience Q&A was the whole show. So I had a guest, but my guest was from the audience.
Yeah.
So it was one of those things that I had a guest on the show that was very, very frequent in questions and comments in the discussion thread. And they actually weren't a podcaster yet, but they had a lot of interest and wanted to get started. And so I invited her to come on and talk about it with the audience. It turned out to be a pretty popular episode. People, I think appreciated the fact that, it wasn't just, somebody that was a highfalutin producer or something like that. It was like, from the community. And I'm going to do that on a fairly regular basis, but I also want to bring in, like Ray here, who's got extensive experience that can really share some insights into how to do this, especially on the video side. I'm still a relative newbie on the video side. I got really all into video really because of COVID, because I was working from home, and I couldn't go.
Else. I got to tell you that while COVID sucked, if you're looking for silver linings as a producer at work, when I get people on camera these days, so much less coaching. More people, because we lived on Zoom for a year or almost 2 years, more people understand lighting, they understand audio, they understand composition, and it's made my job a lot better. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I mean, it was really entertaining to see all those major mainstream media broadcasters trying to do
From home,
their online shows from
the
from
setups
home,
were
right? It was like
fantastic. I enjoyed it.
everybody became a podcaster at that point, and
Yeah, except they had, $1 million crews ship them
well, that's
gear,
true. But some of them still really sucked at it, though. I mean, I have to
which was
say,
even more amazing.
it
More
was,
amazing.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I was totally laughing, but then I also said I needed to upgrade my system too. Like I went out and got some panel lights and that are sitting up. I was going to show you some pictures, and I'll plan on doing that in my next episode with you. Is kind of show you my setup here and what I have. I've got teleprompter. I've got panel lights that I can change the temperature of the lights, but they're small, not very expensive. I mean, get all three of these panel lights I got for like $100 or something off of Amazon. And I don't know what kind of lights do you use, Ray? What's their form factor?
These,
That's it, huh?
I switched the camera. It's the exposure doesn't like it because I'm pointing right at the light.
Right.
But that's a basic little panel from Elgato. Elgato makes a lot of cool streaming gear, and that's what you would call a key light, but it's just a big soft box. And that's from Aperture. I got too much gear here, so again, check out my Instagram where I actually show this stuff. And then we've got the Rode for the audio, and that's just
I've got
a
the
mixer.
same. I've got the same here too. Right.
But I can't pull this cable out enough to give you a wide shot. The exposure doesn't like the camera doesn't like being pointed right into light. Go figure.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, those are that is basic 3-point lighting, right? And that is one light to your left, one light to your right. But you could do it with one light. I can turn off one of these. The whole idea is to put light on your face so that and properly expose it so that the audience can see. They can see your face. That's it. And it's as simple as sitting in front of a window at home. Obviously, this is daytime. But and that has its own issues because the sun is going to change, clouds are going to go by. But generally on Zoom calls, a lot of times for work, it's like tell people to sit facing a window. If the window is behind you, you're going to be a silhouette. And
yeah, you're not going to get seen. Yeah.
So it's very basic things like that. That the beauty of it is that they're timeless. The audio that we use, this microphone is like from the 50s. Like it is still like a gold standard. Things haven't changed. Good audio doesn't really change.
Yeah, I've had my SM7B since I think I bought it in 2008 or 2009.
These are things you put in your will. Like
right.
That is one of the things about buying a good microphone is that you probably buy it once.
Yeah, and I think back then, I only paid like $250 for this thing, but now they're like $385 or something like that now.
They're $399, but then it went up. The SM7B actually just got an upgrade, which doesn't happen very often. And they have the SM7DB. So if you know anything about this microphone, it's tremendously gain hungry. It's not sensitive at all. And so I bet, Rob, you have that plugged into like a cloud lifter.
I do have a cloud lifter. Yes.
Right.
Yes,
so
I had to do that.
People don't realize they buy this. It's $400. They got to spend $100 on a preamp,
cloud lifter,
and then an audio interface. But basically, Shure said, "Oh, we get it. We've seen you guys doing that for so long. We're going to put the cloud lifter. It's not a cloud lifter inside. So but you're going to pay for it, right? It's going to cost more money. So it's ironic that the more you spend, oftentimes the more complex the setup gets, or there's more to spend money on. So
yeah, I would say that the upgrade to the Rodecaster line of products, though, is amazing. I mean, I've got the first Pro Rodecaster Pro, and I don't see any compelling reason to upgrade to the new ones. For a lot of reasons, it really gets back to just the complexity of the new ones. These things are not easy to get set up properly because there's so many settings in them. There's a lot of built-in software in these.
Yeah, mixers. Yeah, a lot of built-in. There's a lot of features, but then you just up the complexity. And to be honest with you, you up the chance of something going wrong in your recording.
Yeah, yeah, and I know a lot of YouTubers pre-record directly into their cameras, right? So they'll actually record at really high quality video into their cameras, and they won't even probably use a computer until they get into post-production. So do you advise that as well?
I mean, it is what's easiest for you, because again, the hardest part of all of this is getting started and keeping going, right? And so
Right.
my YouTube channel is all shot, like it's all it's all shot before you see it, right? It's not live. So
Yeah, yeah.
my podcasts on YouTube are live or
Yeah, but
recorded
do
via
you
StreamYard
record into
straight
your
through.
computer through an HDMI output, or are you
No,
recording onto an SD card
no,
or
you're seeing me via HDMI, and I could record that way, but typically I'm going to go around and shoot B-roll. I'm going to switch my
right,
angle. So that's all done on tripod. It doesn't involve a computer at all. In fact, most of my years producing a podcast don't involve a computer. It's recording
got
into
it.
an audio
The camera,
recorder and then going to a computer for post-production. So a
right?
lot of the production I've done for the last 15 years has been off of the computer, and the computer is just another potential fail point.
Yeah,
But I'm finding, and kind of rolling back something we talked about earlier, that someone getting started, and if you're talking about a podcast and video, like I would put them on StreamYard. The reason that the Podcasters Roundtable, the sole reason it is a video podcast, essentially, which is a video on YouTube, is because Google came out with Google Hangouts on Air, and it was
hmm,
basically StreamYard before StreamYard.
right.
And because they're Google, they killed it. But that went for
Of
like
course.
7 years or something.
Yeah,
And because that was how we connected. Like a lot of podcasts are going to be having a conversation either with a co-host or a guest remotely. And
yeah,
so you are going to probably use one of these apps to do that recording. And so if you're in StreamYard and you're connecting with your remote guest, why not? You're making a video at the same time. So why wouldn't you publish that video, right? There could be reasons you might not want to, because it is great to talk and see someone. But
right.
for the new person, it allows you to do two things at once. You record your podcast,
Hmm.
high quality, because StreamYard now has ability, which is that's where the real boon came for me in using online software, is when they remove the internet. Essentially, you're recording. If you do multi-channel separated audio, you can record in the browser. So the internet, you'll see internet dropouts all the time. It's
Right,
not an issue anymore.
right, right.
Because you'll record in the browser and then upload. So as a podcast producer who wants multi-channel, I want to be able to process all of those channels separately.
Yeah, it's
StreamYard's
called
going to do
local
all that.
recording. Right.
Yeah, do
That's
the
what they
local
call
recording. Then you'll have the high quality file for post production if you want it. But you'll have a mixed video that's ready to go to YouTube.
it. Hmm.
You can send it direct from StreamYard. So, I mean, Google Hangouts enabled that show. They announced that they were going to launch this tech. And I said, I've got a show for that. I want to talk to my friends. And in fact, you talked about the community. The whole show, the Podcaster Roundtable, was about the communities. If you listened to the show, if you were a listener, that's how you got on the show. Because people would come on, and I would bring a new person from the community on every show. So we have me, Dave Jackson, Daniel J. Lewis, and maybe
Hmm.
yourself. So you'd have all this experience, and then we definitely brought on as many people as possible every round
Yeah.
who maybe have, you want to mix that with people who have no experience, or maybe they have a year experience, but they have, as a podcast producer, they 100% have something to share and teach you. So that was really the fun of that show. But because they enabled the ability to meet like this online and record,
Hmm.
it was a video show. And so when Hangouts went away, like right at the same time, StreamYard comes out. And I went and looked up my show. The Podcast Roundtable started in July of 2012. And we switched to StreamYard on October 19th, round 133. So episode 133. And there was a 3-month gap in there when Hangouts went away and I found StreamYard. So StreamYard enabled that show to keep going, at least at the easy way we were doing it then, right? You have Zoom come along; they're doing that as well. People might ask, "Can I use Zoom?" You 100% can. I don't like it as much as a producer because it can be just a little more clunky to use. But is it possible? 100% it's possible. But yeah. Now that these apps exist, I would tell a new podcaster, record there. Even, if it's by yourself, you can record your video and then post that to YouTube and then take the audio and post it to an RSS feed. And then you're just distributing to different platforms, which I think is really important these days. People always want to know, how do I grow my show? How do I market? How do I get new listeners, new followers? I saw a really interesting thing today where a woman who was doing her podcast, I was on Instagram, she basically put her phone up while she was recording into like an MV7, so basically an SM7B, and vertical. And she recorded the whole thing. It was about a 30-minute, and I think you can record video on, you can put up to an hour on Instagram as a video, then they turn it into a reel. Gets weird. But I 100% discovered and watched some of it. It was all about discovery. Would have never, ever come across this show. But she was doing basically, which I'd never seen someone, it was just today too. I'd never seen someone put like 60 minutes of video into Instagram. It was her entire podcast episode.
Well, that's the up and coming new live platform is Instagram. And so it's still a little kludgy to work with right now. I'm not utilizing it for this show, just for kind of technical limitations with my access to the StreamYard Instagram account. But it is a little kludgy still. But I do know that the StreamYard team is working on trying to work with Instagram to make this process a lot more like what YouTube does, right? Or Facebook or X or any of these platforms, to make it a lot easier to do this, because we're live on all those other platforms right now, all the ones that are easy to use.
Yeah,
because Instagram is not.
I don't even encourage, like, live is not, live is almost feels like almost bonus content to me, because you're gonna pick up a much smaller percentage of your audience. It is, if you do live at a regular time, this show is probably is regular, same
it is
day of the week, same time. So
exactly.
People can count on it the way they hopefully can count on your podcast. But I don't urge new producers to get into live. If you're currently doing some type of production and you find that you have the extra bandwidth, and that's usually what I say when audio podcasters, people come to me, and I've done, I've coached people in the past, and it's like they want to start, a 4-person podcast that live streams to video and goes to Apple, and I'm like, slow down. Like, do one thing really well. That's usually the audio podcast.
Then kind of move up.
Yeah, move up. If you find that, I have the extra space in my life to do this extra work, then move up. But, live is it's a step beyond that. Now, if you have a show that you can record live like this, you're already getting the video. You're going to have to process for podcast later. So that's an extra step. But we are, killing a lot of birds with one stone. And I didn't say ducks, so Puddles is okay.
Puddles is safe. Is that what you're saying?
Puddles is safe. I'm not a duck hunter. But so these days, and we haven't even talked about AI. AI is helping a lot for, I think, podcast and video producers do more with less, or not adding much more to your workflow. So
once you've learned it, once you know how to use it, and I think
there's not much you have to learn these days. People always, I hear all this conversation about, oh no, AI is going to either take the job and in some case it will. But when it comes to when it comes to creators, it's obvious, it's more usually about extending how much you can do. And it really is helpful. But people worry about I got to go learn AI. And I'm not talking about prompt engineering here. We have to know how to finagle the things. I've always told people, you don't have to worry about AI. AI is going to come to you. So if you use Photoshop, you're just going to press a button. I mean, this is already in apps. On Instagram, you're remove the background gone. That used to be a very hard thing to do. AI is making that perfect, seamless. I can take, literally, when you post this to YouTube, I can take the YouTube URL. There are more 3 different apps that I can drop the URL in. It's going to spit out 15 different social clips of the most compelling parts of our conversation. It's going to add text over it. The thing you all have seen on social, where it figures, if a producer was doing that, it would take them hours just to select the clips alone. So I didn't have to know anything. It's cut and paste. I mean, and we're seeing the pace of AI is insane. Every day I turn on the computer, it can do a new thing. So don't worry about how much you have to know. It's becoming cut and paste.
So been seeing quite a few comments in the comment thread about cameras, and I know that we covered that kind of earlier in the stream. And I don't know if we want to maybe talk about that a little bit, Ray, is kind of recover that. So there's mirrorless cameras, and then there's webcams. Which models are you recommending as kind of high value ones right now for beginners and advanced folks? I mean, the mirrorless cameras can be kind of expensive, but they don't necessarily have to be that expensive, do
They
they?
don't have to be. So you can get into like basically mirrorless and DSLR interchangeable, right? When people say DSLR, they
Right.
oftentimes mean mirrorless. Doesn't matter. Canon, Sony, Panasonic, all have great options, and now it's becoming much easier. These manufacturers are starting to turn some of these cameras into essentially webcams. So I know on some of the later Sony mirrorless models, I'm in the Sony ecosystem, but I started in Canon and I switched for various reasons. They're both fantastic. A lot of these now can plug into USB. They have USB on the camera, can plug into your computer, and boom, you have a webcam that is like a, $1,000, $2,000 webcam. And you can get some features for that, but you can have just a USB webcam. So like the one I showed earlier is like an Elgato face cam. It
Yeah.
looked really well, right? I used the C920 from Logitech for years. I saw
Right.
someone mention the Brio. Look for a webcam that's like 1080 or better. There's no shortage of channels that review this stuff. Just type in
Right.
webcams for live stream, whatever it is, you'll see a review. I follow a YouTuber. He's all about live. I think his name's Harris Heller. He reviews every webcam that comes out, and he's very much into the mirrorless. And he's looking for, he really does a great job of like caring about the quality of these things. So, there's just endless people. And so like webcam, again, can be $100. The whole Sony system, you can add your own. When you get into DSLRs and mirrorless, you have
Yeah,
to get
that's
into
what this is
lenses.
right on the screen here. This is the Sony Alpha A6
That's it's a
500.
Right. That's like a 2016 model. I'm using it now. It's 4K and I'm live streaming. And so a lot of people then there, I think I saw the question, how this camera's older. It doesn't do USB direct to, I think there's some software that might do it. A lot of times that gets weird and finicky. And in these things, again, sometimes the barrier is how do I do it? The software is glitchy, whatever, right? Won't show up in my system, whatever. So you want to
It
make
also
that easy
depends on the
possible.
lens that you get too. So you still, I mean, this is just the actual camera case itself.
Yeah,
You have to get one of these one of
right.
these lenses that gives you the option to zoom or just be on more of a wider angle view, and that's what this one would be, right?
Yeah, and when you get into that world, that's the thing to understand is like, oh, I've saved up, $1,500 for this camera, and you don't realize, well, you still need a lens, and then if you get in the computer, sometimes you need a capture card, which takes the HDMI, turns it into USB
Right.
essentially. So a lot of times, the better option for someone, especially on like a talking head podcast that goes to video, a
Hmm.
webcam is a fantastic option. I just recently, I mean, if we want to talk about like again, podcast on YouTube versus just podcast,
Hmm.
um, Discovery, that whole thing. The Kelsey brothers, these are football players that you may have heard of or may not, but they're famous football players, and I see them on like YouTube Shorts all the time. Didn't know they had a podcast. Turns out they have like 2.6 million subs or something. I will probably never go and listen to the audio podcast, but I watched one of the shorts because, again, we talk about like how people are viewing and then like when and where they want to view.
Hmm.
So there's like usually a time in the day where I'm going to be in YouTube and I'm just going to scroll shorts for a little while. And so in that case, a lot of times I scroll podcasts and gives me this awareness. And again, what's the upside? Ray, you just said you're probably never going to listen to audio podcast, but you can bet I'm probably going to keep watching a lot of the shorts because I have. So,
Yeah.
that all depends on your CTA and your revenue model and what you're trying to do with your podcast. But I now know that there's a show. Like it is in that case, it was a discovery mechanism, right? So being on shorts. And again, I mentioned you
Right.
could drop an AI, it can give you the shorts and you can move on with your life and just have your audio podcast or the podcast that's on YouTube. you don't even have to work that hard to get those these days. So yeah, there's just so many things to talk about.
Oh
in
yeah,
terms of
there is.
distribution,
An hour
and
and
marketing and growing your show.
yeah, exactly. An hour and 10 minutes is nowhere near enough time to really cover all these topics. But we do the best we can with the time we have, and I do have a giveaway that I want to do. So there's the opportunity to win a Puddles and a hoodie sweatshirt.
Do I qualify for Puddles?
How do I
get in this? How do
yeah,
I get in this, Rob?
go ahead and in the comment field for if you happen to have Facebook up or any of the social platforms that are streaming this live, go ahead and type in #TheYard, just like
that's where I've seen that. Yeah,
that's what this is here. So it's the same. Oops, wrong one. I clicked on the wrong one just as a new one came in. Oh yeah, here it is. So this is the format. So just enter that, and what StreamYard does is they pick that up from the social commenting. It's the same process that I'm bringing in comments and displaying them on the screen. So the software captures that, and at the end of the show, there's a little giveaway tool that I think we're up to 41 entries now.
Nice.
In the giveaway.
I did not enter. Don't worry. I don't
know. You could.
I'll enter. I'll come back.
You could qualify
as a viewer next time. And if you're going to be doing that, it sounds like it's something you regularly do. So I'm going to.
Oh, it is. It's in every episode. So
can I buy the duck, or can you only win it?
StreamYard does have a merch marketplace.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So, and then though the person that will win the drawing, please send me an email to this address. You can also use just Rob Greenlee at gmail.com too, but rob.greenlee at gmail.com is the best way to send me an email with your mailing address, so I can email you back, as well as submit your address to the StreamYard team to get you your merchandise mailed out to you. And also, since I'm giving away a sweatshirt, I need to know your shirt size. Or your sweatshirt size, whichever it might be. So we send you the right size for you. So let's go ahead and pull up the drawing. I think we're at like hour 15, which is usually my cutoff time on the show duration. But I really appreciate you tuning in and being here with me for a whole hour and spending time with Ray. He's a terrific guy, and he's been a friend of mine for a long time. And I know he really appreciates, everybody that's here. Ray, go ahead and say your piece, and also say how people can find you.
Yeah, totally. No, I love the chat. And as a producer, I'm always kind of got one eye, and I try to give shout outs in there, but it's different being a guest. You're kind of focused here, but as a producer, I'm usually in the comments, bringing those in. And so thanks everyone for tuning in. It's kind of funny because it's one of my sort of pet peeves about podcasts is when a podcast, so not a live stream, when a podcast says, well, we're about out of time. Yeah. Out of whose time? In most cases, there's not a producer. It's not radio, right? You don't have to cut to commercial, or and so like a conversation could be really well, and people get stuck in this like 60-minute platform thing. But on live, we've asked people to show up. You've all shown up, so we do want to let you go. But I appreciate it. Thanks. RayOrtega.com has pretty much everywhere you can jump off to find me from there. So thanks again, Rob. This has been a blast. I want that duck.
Yeah. Well, I feel lucky that I a while back. But let's go ahead and pull the drawing string and see who's gonna win the merch. So let's do it.
Like, make it go. Wow.
Here it comes. That. It's coming. Yeah. It's coming. Get excited.
Oh, good. I want you
to. I don't know that I can say that. Was it Yoxki D La?
Yeah. Yoxki De La X or something?
De La X. You're the winner of the StreamYard duck and sweatshirt. So please send me an email with your mailing address and your sweatshirt size, and I'd be happy to share that with the team and get that merch mailed out to you. So,
you get both.
Right. Thank you so much.
One person got one. That's cool.
Right. Thank you so much for being here with me tonight. And And let me see if I want to throw up a couple of other comments or questions. I want to make sure I kind of cover any great questions that came in just towards the end here.
And I've been trying to click on things. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not the producer. I don't add that.
So always comes in a lot towards the end of the show. And like I said, oh yeah. And Ray says, Puddles has a new home. Yes, he does have a new home. Actually, if you ever go to a podcast conference, like Podcast Movement or Podfest or whatever, StreamYard usually has a booth there, and they'll give out puddles all the time from the booth. So if
I've been to one or two of those, so yes.
If you come by the booth and you're a StreamYard user, you'll probably wind up with puddles going home with you. So let's see here. I don't think there's a few comments coming in, but I think if everybody wants to kind of move on with their evening. But I do appreciate you being here. Thank you so much. And we'll be back next Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern and 4 p.m. Pacific. And I will have another terrific guest for you on the program. I believe I have James Cridlin from Pod News is going to join me in the next episode. So if you're a subscriber to podnews.net, it's going to be a special guest. He's going to call in from Australia, Brisbane, Australia, to join me. So
yeah, if you just want to get especially nerdy, James, he does.
James is especially nerdy,
yes,
right?
And in the best way possible. He's going to give you some detailed information. 100%. So. Oh
yeah, and he'll challenge any assumptions that are out there. So if I say something wrong, he will definitely call me on it.
Yes, he will. That's his value add.
Right, it is.
Push back.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining me. I appreciate you being here with me. And I know this has been a long goodbye, but it's always a hard, long goodbye. And if you won the giveaway, that's my email address. So let me know. So anyway, I'm going to drop this out. And here's Ray's website address. Go visit his website and check out his YouTube channel. So thanks so much. Good night.
Wave goodbye, as they say in the round table.